Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Friday, May 8th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square State Government reporter. And in today's episode of Washington in Focus, we have the next move made in the income tax fight. The back and forth has been fast and furious. And today, Let's Go Washington announced that they have ballot titles for an initiative campaign. They're going to move forward with this, and they have yet to decide just exactly which version of the initiatives they have filed with the AG's office will proceed. But they are ready to go with petition sheets, and supporters hoping to repeal the income tax are being encouraged to move forward. Meantime, supporters of the income tax are furiously trying to convince people that this is a futile effort and that there are many things to gain if we keep the income tax in place. And then pressure mounting on Governor Bob Ferguson to opt our state into the federal education tax credit scholarship program. Now that a second Democratic governor has opted into the program, none other than New York's Governor Kathy Hochul, who is signaling she is about to jump into this program. She'd be the second governor, right behind Colorado, to opt into this program as we wait to find out if, in fact, Washington's Governor Bob Ferguson is going to opt us in. So, all that's at stake there. Coming up with some perspective from Washington Policy Center's Education Center Director Vicki Murray just ahead. And then my colleagues Tim Clauser and TJ Martineau with an update on Washington State Attorney General's Office of the Artificial Intelligence Task Force looking to further regulate AI data. And that centers around some different perspective happening in the city of Seattle. They're looking at a moratorium on AI data centers. Meantime, the state is, as a whole, trying to figure out how to proceed and navigate this landscape and how this impacts local utility rates, i.e., your power bill. So, all that coming up in today's episode of Washington in Focus. So, let's dive in. Today, Let's Go Washington announced they have received their initiative ballot titles from the Office of the State Attorney General and our governor. That means the group is preparing to launch their signature gathering effort moving forward in hopes, they say, of repealing the newly signed income tax bill. It was about a month ago that Let's Go Washington's founder, Brian Haywood, filed close to a dozen potential initiatives aimed at repealing the so called millionaire's tax. This is, of course, the 9.9% tax on those who make more than $1 million or combined household income above $1 million. Based on what you make in 2028, you'd be paying in 2029. That would be the first year the state would be receiving profits from the millionaire's tax. But many believe this is a tax eventually going to be lowered. The threshold would be lowered to be eventually a tax on all income earners in the state of Washington. So now we have Let's Go Washington receiving their ballot titles and saying, we're ready to move forward. Now, as I mentioned, there are about a dozen different potential versions of this initiative to potentially repeal the income tax that are moving forward. They haven't said exactly which one of those is going to move forward. We expect to find that out very soon. But Hallie Balch with Let's Go Washington today told me they expect Pacifica Law Group, actively involved in supporting the income tax, to kind of, in her words, play their political games and challenge the titles. So at this point, they're not saying which one of those is going to move forward. I think they're waiting to find out exactly what the legal challenge is going to be to each of those before they make a determination on which one of those will move forward. Back on Monday, I should tell you that, in case you missed it, the Washington State Supreme Court denied Let's Go Washington's attempt for a repeal of the Secretary of State, saying you can't move forward with a referendum on the income tax because of a necessity clause that was attached to the bill, making it essential to the state budget. And the Secretary of State cited the fact that, this has been the precedent, and a necessity clause attached precludes a vote of the people via referendum. State Supreme Court agreed. So that left Let's Go Washington with the option of moving forward with initiatives as they are now. So I spoke to Let's Go Washington's spokesman today, Darren Littell, who told me that they are receiving overwhelming, unprecedented support from people saying, we want to help gather signatures. We want to do whatever we can to potentially repeal this income tax even before it takes effect.
We are really excited about the fact that we got some ballot titles back, and those ballot titles are ones that we are confident will convince people that this is the right thing to do, repealing this income tax that's going to eventually hit absolutely every person here in Washington State. And so there is enough in the ballot title that we think it is clear enough that we're excited to move forward. The response to the initiatives this year is unlike anything we've seen before. Last year we did Initiative 2066, which stopped the natural gas ban. And at that time, it felt like there was an overwhelming amount of support, but it's truly unprecedented. Every day when we go out and talk to people, we hear more and more stories of folks that are concerned that this is going to affect them, that this tax is going to be expanded, that they are already have plans to move out, and they say, "Look, I'm not going to be paying this tax right off the bat, but I know eventually it's going to come for me." And so I either need to get out or I need to do something. And so how can I help? How can I sign up? What can I do? And so we've got thousands of people who have signed up already to receive petitions, which is more than we've ever had before in any of the other initiative signing campaigns we've done. So we're pretty excited about the enthusiasm out there, and we're going to continue to build on it and let people know, eventually they're going to need to vote yes to stop the income tax, and look forward to being successful in November.
Washington voters have 10 times rejected an income tax, and the Washington State Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that income is property subject to our state constitution. And that means that income has to be taxed uniformly. Your property is uniformly 1% tax. So you can't have just millionaires taxed by this new income tax. It would have to be uniform. And so that is one of the main contentions for challengers to the income tax. Now, Invest in Washington Now, one of the main advocacy groups backing the income tax, emailed me a response today upon learning that Let's Go Washington's initiative campaign is moving forward. This is what they sent me in part. They claim their polling shows Washingtonians overwhelmingly support fixing Washington's upside down tax code, with 60% supporting the millionaire's tax to fund education and healthcare. The state, they say, is backed up by the landslide rejection of Brian Haywood's Initiative 2109, with 64% of voters choosing to maintain the capital gains tax on extraordinary profits in 2024. So at this point, a decision on which initiative moves forward has not been made. I'm told that will be made in the weeks ahead. Again, based on what legal those the legal world pushing against the ballot titles have to come back with for Let's Go Washington. So stay tuned for that. Now, pressure mounting on the office of Governor Bob Ferguson to opt our state into the federal education tax credit scholarship program. Now that a second Democratic governor has opted into the program, it's not official yet, but on Thursday, New York's Governor Kathy Hochul signaled she does intend to opt her state into the program. She said that the federal tax credit scholarship program that would expand kind of school choice across the state by helping some nonprofits direct financial assistance to education priorities is something that she is in support of. We wait to find out if, in fact, Washington's governor is going to opt us into this program. He has until the first of the year to make a decision on that. Now, this program is a dollar for dollar federal tax credit of up to $1,700 based on how much money you make and based on what your federal income tax returns look like for scholarship granting nonprofits. And in turn, these organizations um, can, say, okay, you want to give your tax credit to the public education of your choice. You want to send that to a charter school in your community. You want to use that for transportation services. You want to direct that money to special education, maybe some special tutoring program, a special after school program. You, the taxpayer, get to decide. Now, no matter what, you can take advantage of this on your income tax return. The question is, will that money stay here in the state of Washington, or will Washington taxpayers have to send that money to another state that has opted into this program? So, Vicki Murray is Washington Policy Center's Education Center Director, a huge proponent of school choice and really pushing on Governor Ferguson to opt our state into this program.
The question for Democratic governors is, do you want hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on your state? For Washington state, it's conservatively over $700 million annually that could be for public and private school student, educational expenses. So governors are wondering, do we let all that money go? Because here's the thing, as federal taxpayers, each and every one of us is already able to take that credit off of our income taxes. So that's done. There's no question about that. The only question before Democratic governors is whether your state is opted in or not. Because if your state does not opt in to participate in the program, federal taxpayers can make donations for scholarships, but they'll go to children in schools in other states. So the question for Governor Ferguson is, do we want more than $700 million annually to go to now? 27 states have formally opted in. It's really 30 states have indicated formally and informally that they're going to be participating. So we have a choice of, the vast majority of states in the country and not Washington at this point. Why wait?
Now, I've been told that Governor Ferguson is under some pressure from the Washington Education Association, which is the state teachers union. They and some other blue state teachers unions don't want money directed into anything outside of the public education system. Now, keep in mind, this program does not take anything away, not a single dollar away from public education dollars in the state of Washington. This simply provides taxpayers on their federal income tax to say, if we've opted in, to say, yeah, I want this additional money to go into the scholarship for, thus and such a fund. And maybe you're a charter school proponent. Maybe you're a private school proponent. Maybe you love your local, school district in the state of Washington, but you want it to go into an after school program. You, as that taxpayer, will have the discretion of saying, this is where I want my money directed. But if Washington state does not opt in, we will not have that discretion. We can say, okay, let's send it to Mississippi or Arizona or Florida, another state that has opted into the program. More now from Vicki Murray at Washington Policy Center.
Well, the WEA, like its parent organization, is, their opposition to anything that includes non-public schools is nothing new. Nobody should be surprised by this. But I think the question people are starting to ask now, that's really a position that's a relic of a bygone era. You look at people today, we have so many choices in every other aspect of our lives. The idea that we have more freedom to choose a breakfast cereal than we do as to where to send how to educate our children, not just where to send them to school, but how to educate our children. That's something from decades ago. So I think what we have to look at is, do we want, at a time, especially for Washington, when we have higher and only getting higher taxes, less affordability, can we really afford not to participate in this program? Because I want to be very clear. This program is already paid for with our federal tax dollars. The only question is, do Washington students and schools benefit, or, Montana, Idaho, or the dozens of other states that are participating?
So, first of the year is the deadline for Governor Ferguson to decide whether or not to opt in. Murray at Washington Policy Center told me that many states that have already opted in have organizations that are forming already, these scholarship organizations within their states, to say, yeah, we want to help, our taxpayers make sure that where they want this money directed, we are in place and ready to roll that out on day one to help students, whether that's public, private, charter, whatever it looks like in the state. But again, we have to decide whether or not we are going to opt into this program. So again, pressure mounting on Governor Ferguson to make that decision. I did reach out to him today, as well as the Washington Education Association. Neither of them responded to my request for an interview or for comment ahead of my article and this podcast today. Not the first time I've reached out and they just declined to comment on this story. So we'll keep the pressure on and let you know if, in fact, we receive some kind of a response. And now my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clauser with a story as cities like Seattle look to impose potential moratoriums on AI data centers. The state attorney general's office has an artificial intelligence task force, which is currently contemplating recommendations to regulate these centers throughout the state amid concerns about the impacts on local utility rates. So, some legal experts say they're very concerned that this is going to, power bills are going to go through the roof. We should have regulations. We could end up with blackouts because of AI data centers and the, sucking off the power grid. And so here's a deep dive with my colleagues TJ and Tim on this very important story, which you can also find on our website at thecentersquare.com, Washington's page.
Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clauser, with the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, here to talk about several recommendations that are coming out of the State Attorney General's office around artificial intelligence and data centers around the state and how they could impact the public sector, electricity and water usage in other areas. TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about these recommendations and what they're suggesting?
So data centers consume a lot of energy, a lot of electricity. In Washington State, we have pretty affordable electrical rates, though they have been increasing in certain areas. And so the concern is that it's going to cause local electrical rates to go up. And so that's one of the concerns, despite the fact that they can provide economic benefits. And so this is already at a time when the electrical grid in Washington State is having a lot of pressure put on it. And so the notion is, some of the recommendations is that this should, putting in safeguards to ensure that the rates for utilities, ratepayers doesn't go up, and that the people who run the data centers are the ones bearing the cost for this added burden to the electrical grid. And so it's just interesting how this is, it's a new emerging industry in Washington State, and it obviously provides benefits in different ways. But there is the concerns, and we kind of saw this with the crypto mining, where you had people going to areas of Washington State where the land was cheap and electrical rates were cheap, and they were just building a lot of these places to mine cryptocurrency, and then the electrical rates were, from what I was hearing, going up. And so it's one of many areas of AI that is generating concern by at least some stakeholders.
So, from my understanding, one of the main proposals or one of the main recommendations from the AGO would be, like you said, these data center providers or these operators covering part of their electrical and water, general utility needs. I mean, how could we see that play out? We did see one proposal go through the state legislature this year. Didn't pass. I'm not sure if it made it through either chamber, but I believe it would have set up a situation where data center operators would have had to commit to paying out a certain amount of their projected utility usage over so many years. That way, if they pulled out early, customers wouldn't be left trying to pick up that burden. Is that something that we're seeing in the recommendations as well, or something along those lines?
The one thing that they're being asked to do, or would be, but keep in mind, these are draft recommendations. They could change. But one of them is requiring that these companies bear the costs of connecting the data centers to the utilities, and then any kind of additional infrastructure upgrades that are necessary for them to exist. there's not a whole lot of other recommendations with data centers for right now. And I talked to a couple people. One was with this law firm that represents some clients that own data centers, and he said it's interesting how the concerns in local and state areas really depends on the scarcity of a resource. So areas where there's not a lot of water, there's concerns because you have to use water to keep the data centers cool. I mean, there's a NSA facility in Utah that uses billions of gallons of water to keep the everything cool. And so there, in some states where there's not a lot of water or they don't have any precipitation, they have to have water brought in from other places. That it could be an issue there. Here in Washington State, for right now, the concern is the cost of hooking them up to the utilities, and then also the impact to utilities when you add the increased demand, and that forces them to raise prices for everybody. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they try to maybe class this as a different type of customer than in a different way than like a private resident or something like that. So what is interesting, as I got a comment from another individual who's with IBM's AI program, and it's interesting how at the same time they're saying you want to get these data centers, you want to be ahead of the curve with the data centers and with AI, because AI software systems and it's really technical and a little wonky, so I'm using layman's terms here. But the whole idea is that these AIs can monitor equipment and systems that use and consume energy to determine how much energy they're consuming, how efficient they're being, when their life cycle is about to end, and when they're increasingly becoming inefficient. And so, in other words, you can use AI that's made possible through data centers to be more efficient with other types of energy consumption. So it seems like it's going to be this balancing act of properly using resources for data centers, but at the same time using those data centers and AI to look at other areas of the economy and look at other types of industries where there's currently maybe not as efficient use of energy, and how AI might be able to provide improvements to that.
Mhm. Interesting balancing act there. Another balancing act going on in Olympia. We know that the state legislature, in part of their effort to fill a multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, they cut a tax exemption for data centers for replacement equipment at these data centers. And there's fear among Republicans that it would push the projects out of Washington State, while there's also fears on the other side about the concerns that you're mentioning around utilities. So it'll be interesting to see how both parties accept these recommendations in the coming months, and how that plays out through proposals as we head into the 2027 state legislature next year. But TJ, appreciate you covering this. We'll be sure to keep our eyes on it over the coming months. But if you're hoping to catch that story, you can read it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
So that is a wrap on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Friday, May the 8th, and the week. Thank you for watching. As always, I encourage you to check out our Center Square Washington page for more articles like this, and join us again next week. Have a great weekend.